And it was one of the things where we were aware that this actually might be a weak spot, that somebody might come and say, okay, but you're asking them about like, hey, what have you learned? And we are like, yeah, that's not really too reliable, is it then? And the thing is, or the thing that happened was that even though these were subjective perceptions, the participants and the project leaders actually valued the learned competences very similarly. Meaning that even though those two groups had nothing in common, they, filled in the questionnaires in different places at different times. They still said the same things. So even though it's subjective, we can say that it's kind of reliable at the moment.
Yes, and quickly, still on the gender issue, we looked at that in Austria with the Austrian data and did not find any significant differences. Okay, so maybe it has to do with country-specific contexts. Yeah. Zero.
But what was surprising in Finnish data that we Finnish are very we always complain about everything, but but those young people were very proud about their Finnish culture and especially of the school system after visiting other school systems in Europe, especially the school food, which is always bad in the opinion, but after this experience they were quite amazing how good things are in Finnish schools. That was quite surprising.
Yeah. Coming back to the gender issue, we also have an overrepresentation of female participants in our samples. And I looked at the competence development and the difference between male and female participants, and we didn't also find significant differences. I must say these are preliminary analysis till now, and I haven't looked at self-realization and so on, so maybe there's a difference. So, but competence development, no. And I don't know anything about mathematical, I haven't looked into it, so I can't say something about it.
Okay. I might go for a second round now. Yes? Okay. I would like to continue with Özge actually, because you said one point was, you made a point on participant profiles. So who are the participants, and had an interesting finding there, and I think it is also maybe...
this is always a debate, the inclusive dimension of these projects. Which young people are benefiting more? Are we really reaching the socially excluded ones, so on and so forth? And in Turkish case, when you look at their, geographically, they were diverse. So young people from all around Turkey were coming. And if you look at the map, all around Turkey means huge. So that's a big success of NA, that they get to mobilize young people from very different cities, small, big, urban, rural. That's diverse. But there is a little bit of homogeneity, that they are educated, speaking some kind of foreign language, students, most of them. So we were curious about this, and we asked it in the focus groups, and with the project leaders as well, why did you particularly choose? And then one clear distinction is when we control for, do they travel abroad for the project, or do they stay in Turkey? Stay in Turkey projects were more inclusive, and when they are traveling abroad, they were more homogeneous. Our hypothesis was they were handpicking good participants because it's a European project. They don't want to bother with someone who doesn't speak English and so on and so forth. Gladfully, our hypothesis was wrong. One of the main reasons is visa. All the project leaders, all the youth workers clearly said, we can't get them visa if they are not a student, because visa is to the embassy. When they apply to the embassy, if we say it's a young person working in a precarious job, he cannot bring a working document. Sometimes a young person without an address, there is no way they will get a visa. So they had to choose to play it safe, find young people who will not have a problem with visa. Or in Turkey, we have the special passports. If your father or mother is a state worker, until 18 years old for men, until you start working for women, you get the special passport that you don't need a visa. So they are particularly sometimes asking, there are only 2 weeks left until the project, there's no way we can get you visa, can you find someone with this special passport, which is affecting the issue. And the Turkish NA is aware of this problem from the very beginning. You know, even before our findings, they knew the visa is an issue, and they are in contact with the embassies. They are trying to develop policies, but until now, it's not very promising.
Thank you, Özge. I came to that point. I thought it was interesting because there is a very visible barrier to youth mobility, something the Council of Europe has been fighting to break for decades already. Unfortunately, not very successful when it goes beyond the European Union. But I think what we must be aware, and that's the finding also from the transnational analysis, is the invisible barriers to youth mobility, which are very often linked to education, educational backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. And we came to the conclusion, and in many ways we came to the conclusion also in other areas of educational science, that also non-formal education is socially inherited. So it's not just the formal education, which we generally know when you have a high formal education with your parents, then the children will also have a high formal education. The same is true also for non-formal education. And this is something I think we should be aware of in an inclusive approach to participation in youth in action, which, on the other hand, is partly quite successful. We reach young people with few opportunities. The question is always just, could it be better? Okay, I would like to pass on the word now to Ciro, because Ciro mentioned a completely different dimension of youth in action effects, and that was, you called it personal development of participants. Do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, that was especially from EVS, which is the long-term project. The participants really, it really changed their life. They became very more self-knowledge. They know what their weaknesses are, what are they good at, and after that they actually knew what they will do with their life afterwards. It was in many open questions and interviews very obvious that this was very strong experience for them.
I would like to add for transnational analysis what came out very clearly, that the participation made young people, participants in general, but also the project leaders, think about their future. So how am I going to develop my educational and professional careers? And at least what we know is they have more ideas about it, new ideas about it, new motivations to do something, and even intentions to do something differently in their future because of their participation. But I want to pass on to Ondra. Ondra, you mentioned something about developing social capital. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. Well, one of the outcomes was that there is a huge level of networking, and was again like now speaking about the Czech sample, it was during all of these observed years. In every of these years, the people told us, participants told us that they got in touch with people from different countries, and that they are still in touch with them. They learned something about their cultures. They learned something about their maybe even working tracks, and most importantly, they told us that some of these people are actually helpful in their further development. Now speaking about education or work, and that is something I think has implications for the social capital development, meaning that we are on one hand like enabling individuals to develop themselves and to create more. To foster their own social networks, and also like fostering the social capital of the Europe as such, because we are actually connecting people throughout. So that's like that. This was a real nice finding, and it's also connected to the multiculturality. So should I maybe mention it as well, or not really?
No,
not so far. Okay.
Not so far.
Wait for it.
No, wait for it. Wait for it. Next round. Okay. I would like to go on because here it is kind of the personal development, the learning, and I think here Hendrik made one of the points was on youth in action as a field, a non-formal learning field. Eva, can you say something on this? what your findings are here.
That is one of our main findings, that the youth in action is not a non-formal and informal learning field, but the non-formal and informal learning field for young people, but at the same hand for organizations and project leaders too. And the organizational change by the program is really enormously. So the whole system is learning at the one hand, and the same benefit for the individuals. And doesn't make no difference if you are a participant or a project leader or a manager or something in between, because that was something interesting and something we would like to prove later, that there's a special biographical path by which we observe, but we don't have any proof, that a special amount of young people, they use the program to develop themselves, to come from action to action, or no, and then to stay as experts, educated in the field for a longer time, even in a in their professional life later. And I think that's very, very interesting. And yes, Youth in Action creates motivation for intercultural learning. That's what you said, and for personal development in a broader sense.
Thank you.
But Hendrik would put it a bit different, and please ask him later. And then
now you are here. Now you are here. You can say it the way you prefer it to. I would like to pass on to Frank at this point, because Frank made some observation on learning preferences. So when it is about non-formal learning, informal learning, formal learning, you made some interesting observations there.
Yeah. We see especially in the special survey, there were some questions asked about the appreciation of the methods used in Youth in Action projects. And most of the participants, a large majority even, are very positive about the methods. They are suitable to learn something, they are innovative, and so on and so on. But at the same time, we see that 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 of the participants also agree with they are a little bit childish, they are not suitable to learn something. And I've looked a little bit closer into who are the people who are more negative about the methods, and then you see it's more older participants, and especially people who have participated in previous similar projects. And the more they have participated in previous projects, the more negative they are. So that means there's a certain need to reinvent projects and methods used in Youth in Action and in youth work in general.
I thought that was interesting, yes, because it's not, I think very often we come to the either or, so to say, it has to be non-formal, and this is good and formal is bad, but for some people it's not that way. So very simply, they're not used to that or not interested, they like a cognitive approach, and sometimes a good lecture is really something nice. I believe, others don't. So, like what Maurice did this morning, okay? I mean, this afternoon. I mean, it was a good, solid lecture. Okay. I pass on. Oh, yes, this is the time to open up again. No, first an answer to Andreas from my side. What I was really surprised about, yes, it took me some time to think about it, what really surprised me. No, but I think one of the most surprising, interesting findings was that, so to say, the learning effect in Youth in Action projects on those who host is not less than for those who go abroad. We always think the going abroad is the learning, but the hosting is a learning as well, but in different areas. It's not the same competences you develop by hosting. For example, we find by hosting, people gain much more management, project organization, participation competence than the sending. The sending learn more about the languages maybe, yes, okay? But so this hosting is equally relevant and fruitful as sending, so taking this Youth in Action terminology, for me was an interesting finding. So now open it.
Any comments or questions at this point?
So John from the UK, currently hiding out in Germany. Just going to the topic around participation and inclusion, I was really interested that the questions that were asked seem to focus on circumstances, so barriers, things like access to education, work and employment, participation in society and politics. And I wonder whether there's also equality strands data collected about participants, so around race, ethnicity, disabilities, sexual orientation, and whether that can be used as a benchmark against national figures in order to understand people who are excluded.
Okay, that is a difficult one. We still see if we have other questions so Helmut can think. Is there anybody else who wants to share something or comment on something? I mean, you're all also having research data and things that you might want to add. Okay, Maurice, and then over there.
I just wondered if the question of linguistic differences has come up at all, and related conceptual differences. Along the lines of the point I made earlier about different words or phrases or terms having not quite translating into other languages, because this is a multilingual research instrument. I wondered if there are any learning there.
And we take one, two, we take two, and then we make a conclusion answer round.
As you can see, I'm really curious about
yes.
youth work. I was surprised about the 2012 survey where the participants were compared to non-participants, and the one significant outcome was that the non-participants have better attitudes to work. And I would like, what's your point of view on that one? Because what I think is that, you know, all these exchanges and non-formal education, they actually contribute to the millennials devaluing the concept of work, you know. So I wonder what you make of this hypothesis. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if I should ask the question, because Frank almost destroyed my question. Because, I mean, when we look at the outcomes of the Ray research, we said there is a very, very high confirming of that what we are doing. So we have very positive answers towards the program. People learn a lot. So we were very pleased to hear the answers. Of course, when you look from the outside, you could say, oh, they find now really, they testify that everything they do is great. And that makes suspicious in a way, because we also look very critical. I mean, working for an NA, you look very critical. We love the program. I think if you would also do research on NA workers, you would find a very high rate of really identifying with the work they are doing. So it's maybe a good idea to make research on people who work in NAs, because they very, very highly anticipate with the program and really love the program. And so when you get so much positive feedback, you also look always critical on what's going on. I mean, I was listening to Eva and the pathways, and I was thinking, like, that's not going to happen anymore, because we don't have the youth initiatives anymore. Because this was the part of the program which brought the people into the program and which is not there anymore. So there were also changes. So shortly the question, what was the negative? Did you find something negative? And also, do you think, I mean, we are still processing lots of data from Youth in Action, and there is a new program, but there are changes, but things go on the same like before, but there are also really changes. And how do you plan to look on these changes in Erasmus Plus, Youth in Action and Youth in Action?
I'm afraid we have to make this the final round of short answers, please, because we're short in time and we want to have 2 minutes for the outlook and for what's going on in the present.
I I start out with the inclusion one, exclusion, inclusion one. That's a tricky part, because to find out through a quantitative survey if people are young people with few opportunities or not is extremely difficult, because you have various indicators. It's extremely difficult if you do it in a transnational way, which works for, let's say, 30 countries. And we have been struggling with that from the beginning. And we only now, in the phase, there's one group that actually deals with inclusion as a specific issue related to the Youth in Action program still. And they're still working on data from 2009 to 2014, in particular France and Belgium and Salto Inclusion. And one of the things is struggling to find out, because if you ask some, how do you find it out? You can't ask people, are you disadvantaged or not? That would be a subjective answer. Many people who are disadvantaged or are young people with few opportunities would not call themselves being young people with few opportunities. So how do you measure it? And then you have a number of other things which in some countries might be considered as a disadvantage and in others not. That's hard. We came to the conclusion to say, well, we have 3 or 4 different indicators, and you must meet at least 2 or 3 of them out of the 4, let's say, or 2 out of 3, that we consider this to be a person with few opportunities. That's a methodological problem we have there. The other problem is that we cannot, based on this, we cannot make any measurement on is this representative or not? Which group and how? I mean, we have questions, subjective assessments if people are disadvantaged, but we never know what is really behind it, behind the answers. So in quantitative terms, it's hard to grasp, to be honest. And we are still struggling with that. If you have good ideas on how we could proceed with that, we are happy, okay? Linguistic, yes, I mean, simply already speaking in Ray network meetings about some issues, also this morning, and we were only 5 countries represented, we are struggling with finding the same concept, for example, of participation and citizenship. So, yes, we use maybe the same term, but we have different diverging notions and understandings of it. We're also there. I'm afraid that still some of the translations are not only 80% translations of the reality, I'm afraid. Yeah? But because simply it cannot be so easily translated from one language in another. Because it's context specific sometimes, and you take it from here, you translate it. And so we will come back to that issue and really see, can things be translated into English and back into the country, from English into the target language and then back into English by somebody else, and how much difference do you find between the two? So that would be the idea to measure it. And on the competence development, I cannot say much. You could say maybe something on the competence development study that the colleague from Slovakia was Marty's study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just about to. Well, the thing that in my opinion, what happened is that you mentioned yourself millennials, a generation who is more into like this traveling and rethinking the whole life. And what actually is happening is that the more these young people travel, the more they rethink this so-called traditional life, where you actually work throughout your life and then you have time to like enjoy yourself. And what they tend to do these days is that they like work 2 years, then they go on a long vacation, then they work another 2 years, and again and again and again. They have a feeling that they want to have something from life before they are old. So that's why I think that we might get these results. But it's like we didn't really follow up on that, in a qualitative way or something. So, and that's anyway just a partial finding. So that's all I've got for that.
Shall we pass the floor to Eske then?
About this disadvantages, it was also interesting to see how it is perceived by individuals, because you cannot ask them, do you consider yourself disadvantaged? But we asked them in indirect ways. And it was funny to find out that majority of them consider themselves disadvantaged for one reason or other. They say, I don't live in a big city, so I'm disadvantaged. I don't speak English so well, so I am disadvantaged. My family never took us to a holiday in Europe. I never been to Europe before, so I'm disadvantaged. So there is this tricky issue of the perception of disadvantage, which is misleading and tricky a little bit, because when you ask them in our survey, were there young people with disadvantages or fewer opportunities involved in the project, they say yes. And you ask who? Me. Why? Because my city is very small and we don't have these opportunities. People in Istanbul, Ankara always go to Europe, we never go.
Okay.
I'm very happy about your question on inclusion and how to deal with it, and it's very, very complicated if you only have the surveys. So as the others said, we went for all the years to see disadvantaged youth in the projects and did with them interviews, and that was very, very interesting. Because first of all, we could make out, as you told us, they were really pleased that somebody comes, is interested in their mind, in their visions, in their opinions, and so on, and they felt even better only by the interviews and saw the different worth estimating function in that interview even. So it was really interesting. And if you once have that their trust, they tell you really everything, and that's interesting. But one key factor came out, and that is the important role of sustainable organizations and really manpower, womanpower, good pedagogues who are really acting with them over a long period of time, not only for one project. And so from our perspective, it's like you can't, on the one hand, only postulate we want to have inclusion and then the others have to realize it, but you have to have sustainable structures and trained and really good skilled facilitators. And that is one of our outcomes, and I think it's very important. If it comes to the structure of youth policy in Europe for the future.
Can I maybe just add something to that? Another thing to this inclusion aspect of our survey is that what we basically did were web-based surveys. So obviously, I mean, for lots of these disadvantaged people, it's even impossible to access these surveys. They do not have the internet connection. They are somehow, they have some health problems which kind of do not allow them to, fill in the questionnaire, whatever. So these are the people who are a priori like out of the survey sample. That's one thing. And the other thing is that what we saw all over again were these highly educated samples, which also stems from the fact that this information about the program were very well spread in the networks such as universities, which also kind of says something about what we should do to disseminate, the program to the ones we want to target.
Okay.
Yeah, I
that
have to answer.
answers a bit
Gerhard's
already.
Yeah.
In one sentence, and then you have the challenge to give us an outlook in 2
you
minutes.
expect from a researcher one sentence. Come on. No, Gerhard, it's the tricky thing about Ray always has been to be self-critical on one hand, but at the same time not destroying your reputation towards the stakeholders who want to kill the program. And this is a balance you have to keep. If you look at the figures, on one hand, you can very clearly see where there is a scope for improvement, okay? And that is tomorrow's topic, actually, improvement for practice. We will go into that. You can say, for example, I don't know, so and so many % positively do a preparation, and they say it has been a good preparation, but then you see only 50% have preparatory meetings of the team, of a multinational team. That's actually bad quality, can't work. If we think intercultural learning happens through Skype, then something has gone wrong. Well. So definitely, no.
That's an intergenerational thing, maybe.
No, I think there's a difference. There's a difference, certainly. No, of course you can organize it. You can manage it, definitely. Huh?
I'll tweet about you
now. Good, do it, yeah? No, but you can look at it in various ways. You can look at that figure and say, okay, something works, but something maybe could be improved. Let's put it that way. Maybe I took the wrong example for you. Okay. But also for other figures, you can say 70% find that administrative procedures are no problem, but 30% have severe problems, okay? And then you can say, and all those who had bigger problems didn't even apply and are not in the program. So we have an exclusion problem. So you can always look at it in two ways, and I think we have very much emphasized the positive sides towards the outside, but I think we have to be critically internally, and that we will do tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. One sentence from Belgium.
Yeah, when it comes from negative aspects, it's always interesting to look at the answers on the open questions. Sometimes you have negative remarks on projects and so on. So.
Okay, Helmut, the challenging question of what's going on, present and future, in 2 sentences. Please.
Yes, 2 long sentences. I think just because I think it's important to know for those who are not directly involved in RAY what is planned for the future. So the RAY network has actually developed 3 new research projects within RAY. One issue is what we always wanted to find out but never could so far, meaning not having a transversal study where we ask ex post what people think they learned, but actually follow people through a longer period of the program, a certain sample. So we will do that with one group with quantitative and qualitative methods, follow this cohort in a longitudinal study over 3 years. And the topic we're looking at is active citizenship and participation on 2 dimensions. One, the competence development that happens specifically with respect to participation and active citizenship. And secondly, the development of citizenship practice and participation practice as a result of the participation. So we interview and survey participants before the project. We interview and survey them after project, actually then comparing answers before and after and see if there is a change in the answer. So actually creating a more objective measurement of change. Using a control group methodologically, so we can see, yes, there has been a change for those who participate, and there has been no change or less change for those who did not participate in the activity. But then actually follow them also with qualitative methods until 3 years later, so we can look at long-term effects. We know very little about long-term effects of youth in action. So that's project number 1, long-term effects with respect to participation and citizenship. The second thing that interests us, that was the first sentence. The second sentence is that there was a big interest in the RAY network on the development of youth work practice through those who get involved specifically in the training and cooperation activities of the Youth in Action program, and how this participation and involvement in Youth in Action affects the youth work competence of people, their competence to work with young people in an international context, but also in a national context, in a local context, and how this affects the organizations specifically. Also, this is a longitudinal thing, not for 3 years, but for 2 years. Actually, we follow first youth workers in their participation and involvement in youth in practice, and then we follow also the organizations of these youth workers. So it's a 2-step. It affects individuals, but it affects also the organizations and systems. So we look at the systemic change. This is project number 3. I need a third sentence, because what will continue to happen is what we refer to as the basic monitoring exercise of RAY, which on a regular basis we survey participants ex post on their activities to find out what is their perception subjective perception of the effect of these activities on their learning, on their future, on their perspectives, attitudes, values, and all that, and so on their competences. So we do that, continue to do that only every second year. We take a full annual cohort, a sample of an annual cohort of all projects, and do that every 2 years. The first of that will happen now in 2015-16, starting in autumn. So we have already the first cohort analyzed by mid-2016, so this could feed actually already into the interim evaluation that Bernard was mentioning today. So we actually, when we start discussing the new program, actually the Commission and the stakeholders and the national authorities have an idea of what has happened in Erasmus Plus in Youth in Action, what is coming out there. Similarly, we will, of course, from the other projects have interim reports, so to say, on what comes out with respect to active citizenship and participation, to youth work practice and competence development, capacity building of organizations, and all that should already have interim conclusions that could go then into the interim evaluation, which then feeds into the development of the new program. So that's the basic idea, basic scope of where we want to go, and we don't know yet what will come up to our minds and which ideas we will have as in 2 years from now. So this is where we stand now.
Thank you, Helmut, for this short outlook. Thanks to all of you for sharing your highlights and experience, also the ones who hide in the first row. Thank you very much. I think this is a warm applause from the audience. Since we knew...
And 5 minutes overtime is very little for a football game, you know, to come out. So.
Since we knew we might not get through all the highlights that they have collected, you can find them displayed in the lobby as well. You might have already noticed where you have coffee. There are some displays with bullet points from different RAY partners giving the highlights that you have just heard as well. Thank you. And while Özge is now preparing for the next step, because we're now going to get you to work. Enough of sitting around, you're going to go into groups and discuss a bit more. I have some practical information for you before we do that, and I hand the floor to Özge to tell you what exactly we are planning. Internet, free wireless LAN is available here in the lobby and in the downstairs area where the seminar rooms are. You get the code at the reception, but you do not have it in your rooms. If anyone needs internet in your rooms, you can get a cable at the reception. Please do not get it and keep it. It's meant for using it and giving it back, because otherwise others have no chance to have some good internet connection for some quick emailing in breaks or in the evening. So that is one thing. The other thing is we're now going into working groups. So Özge will explain you in a minute what exactly we expect you to do. And we're not coming back into plenary today. So this is our last moment together, and that means I have to tell you where you get your food. And that is actually here on the venue in the Orangerie. Those of you who had already lunch know it. It's just walking out here, then you see the place with the big windows. 7:30, dinner is served there, so you're free to work until then, if you wish. But what you do exactly, I ask Özge to tell you.
Okay, so there is so much knowledge in this room as well. There are researchers, there are NAs, there are practitioners, and there are so many countries. So we wanted to use this richness in the room. We have divided the groups. You will notice that we have tried to be mixing the groups. So you will have all 3, 4 groups that are present here represented in the groups as well. And what we want to start with is the link between youth research and policy, the value of research for youth policy development, and with special emphasis on RAY as well, because there are experiences of RAY here. You have created reports, we have presented the national examples, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. So if you were not RAY before, but you have been involved in policy making, you have been involved in communicating research, please share your experiences and your knowledge as well. Some working questions might include, for instance, how to communicate research to policymakers. This is always an issue. how to communicate the research to policymakers. Because sometimes the researchers are to blame. We like to publish it in SSCI indexed articles, so it's good for us to get tenure track, to get promoted. But you know the deal. If I publish something based on Ray reports or Ray data tomorrow in one of those journals, it costs about 50 euros to get the article printed. So it's not out there always. So how can we go about it? What are good ways to communicate research to policymakers? And do the policymakers ready, prepared to use it? Sometimes they can listen it, but what about policy turning into policy? Another question we would like you to talk about is something that was raised here 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago, the summit here again? Somebody said, are we talking about evidence-based policy making, or are we talking about policy-based evidence making? The policymakers, are they saying, show us that this works, and don't bother about that? This was an issue with the struggle between EVS and Youth Exchange, for instance, that EVS was given a lot of importance because the evidence coming from EVS was very rich and promising, while Youth Exchanges in the public eye was not so good. So, is it evidence-based policy making or policy-based evidence making? What are the realities? What are the expectations you are facing? And finally, would you be interested in results from other countries? What is the added value of comparative, transnational, international research? Is it because we can tell our policymakers, look, you're not doing this, but they are doing it works? Or what? This is a question we are asking. Why do we need, or do we need international research, comparative research? Yeah? So each group should volunteer, choose a rapporteur. And Milena, our rapporteur, has prepared report sheets. So it's structured. This is a good practice that I am stealing. I already have one. And the reporter should give these either to me or to Milena by dinner time. So you are free to work until dinner time. And as long as you return the reports either to me or to Milena by dinner time, whoever you find first. Okay? One reporter per each group. Now, finally, where do the groups work? 2 groups will work in this room. Just feel free to arrange the chairs. And 2 groups, Marco, 2 groups will go to room number 1, which is upstairs. Up the stairs. It's not upstairs, it's up the stairs. You were thinking in German, weren't you? I'm sure in German there are different articles, if it's 5 steps or 4 steps. Yeah? Okay, so 2 groups will go to room number 1, and 1 lucky group will work in the lobby closer to the coffee machine, and this new group of young people checking into Europahaus tonight for a big youth exchange. No. God forbid. No, that's not the case. 2 groups here, 2 groups in number 1, and 1 group in lobby. We didn't decide. We're not going to say 2 groups, which groups are here. You decide on your own. You organize yourselves. Yep. This is why I didn't offer, because some people are saying this room is too hot, some people are saying this room is too cold, and I don't want my ears burning all night long if you get cold or hot, saying, he put us here, why did he do that? I am not getting my hands in the fire. You decide in your group. And if 3 groups go to 1, there is only one solution, mud wrestling or football. You decide. Okay, see you at dinner. Thanks for the motivation, thanks for the participation, attention. See you tonight.